Hello, this is Gatecrasher, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass to iconic events, and I'm your host, Anna Peters. It's a show for people who want to explore behind the scenes of high-profile events, and our guest today certainly does just that, hosting events for VVIPs in extraordinary venues.
Your guests are literally walking in the footsteps of kings and queens and walking in the footsteps of the guests that they would have had in these spaces and hosting once-in-a-lifetime experiences.
Over hundreds of years, the historic royal palaces such as Hampton Court, Kensington Palace and Banqueting Hall have provided the backdrop to glittering banquets, fabulous celebrations and splendid royal occasions. They're the type of venues that tend to attract famous and distinguished clients, which means there can be a lot of pressure on the organiser to get it right, especially as these events also often attract plenty of press interest, even more so if the host is a member of the royal family. So just what's involved in pulling off prestigious VIP events? To find out, I spoke to Liz Young, Head of Events and Commercial Services at Historic Royal Palaces. And I started by asking her about one particular event at Hampton Court Palace, where Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, hosted a concert to raise funds for Sentebale Charity.
Sentebale is a charity that Prince Harry set up with Prince Sisu from Lesotho after spending his gap year over in Africa. And it's essentially a charity to provide support for children that are affected by extreme poverty and specifically the impact of HIV/AIDS. It started off in Lesotho, but has now actually expanded into Malawi and Botswana as well. And basically what the charity does, it works with grassroots organisations to basically provide a wide range of programmes for the children who are affected by these things, sort of education and healthcare and all manner of programmes to sort of look after their physical and emotional well-being. And essentially, the driving purpose of it is obviously to support them there, but also to sort of try and empower a younger generation to sort of drive a positive change. And in particular, this fundraiser concert that we did had a hashtag Stop the Stigma, to sort of try and change the perception for these children who are living with the impact of HIV and AIDS.
Do you feel he had a very sort of emotional connection to the event and to the charity?
Obviously, we know that he has a very strong connection to his mother. And as a lot of the royal family do have charities that do support a lot of charities, of course, that I think are very authentic to each of them as individuals. And this one in particular, I think he does feel very strongly about. And I think that really came across in the way that, the planning for the event and his involvement in the planning for it. And, he was very engaged in it and very instrumental in sort of putting things together and having an opinion on what it should be and what the outcome should be from the evening. So I do think it's very close to his heart. It was really quite a wonderful planning process, actually, with all the different people that were involved. But you could definitely tell that there was information coming from him of how he wanted it to, what he wanted the outcomes to be.
It's interesting to hear. Do you think it meant that it was a different approach to possibly some of the other royal events, maybe more traditional events? Do you think that he wanted it to be a more modern event for a modern royal family?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think both Prince William and Prince Harry, this is totally my own personal opinion, of course, but I think you can really see that in the way that they work and the way that they operate their events. And in particular with this one, it really felt like we were using all of the modern tools at our disposal to sort of try and make sure that the reach was as wide as it could be, the impact was as big as it could be. So, for example, we had lots of VIPs on site, lots of celebrities who were there, were using social media. So, they were really trying to spark the interest of the general public in a very sort of modern and fun and exciting and contemporary way. Because who doesn't want to see what Tom Hardy's been up to and look at pictures of James Norton and Rosamund Pike, etc. And so all of that, I think, really feeds into a very new way of doing things. But also in the planning process, we had been thinking very carefully about the movement of Prince Harry around the venue, because obviously we needed to move him between rooms. And there was a lot of people on site. There's going to be a huge amount of general public, as well as these celebrities and VIPs, etc. And so we were thinking very carefully about, how do we find a safe route for him through, different spaces, etc. And actually, what was very interesting was that on the day, Prince Harry was actually very relaxed and very happy just to sort of wander through the public areas. And I think that was really special. That's something really magical for a general member of the general public to sort of be walking through. Then there's Prince Harry just wandering through and chatting to people and, smiling, etc. So I do think that that's a very refreshing way of operating, and was absolutely fantastic on the night for everybody who was there.
Yes, it's a kind of approachability, isn't it? And understanding, I suppose, the power of social media and making yourself available that the royals are sort of, getting much better at doing. What about the event? You've mentioned that it was a concert. So tell us who was performing and how many acts you were having to stage manage.
Yes, so there was quite a few different acts that were performing. The main headline act was Rita Ora. There were also then a number of African acts that were performing. So we had Inala, which is a Zulu ballet performance, which was absolutely stunning. It was absolutely incredible. And we had the Soweto Gospel Choir. And the charity have this programme of youth advocates who have benefited from the programme from the charity, and then go out into the community and into the wider world to talk about, what the support they have received and sort of just their experience of the charity. And we actually had a couple of those youth advocates doing a talk and a Q&A with the MC, who was George the Poet. And that was actually a really powerful part of the evening, when they were talking about their experiences and what they'd been through, and actually what support they had received from the charity. And I think that was a really incredible moment. People who were sitting in the auditorium were really quite moved by that, I think, which was a wonderful thing to have.
What a great way to sort of make sure that the charity can clearly convey its messaging. So you've got all the glamour and glitz of, the celebrities and so on, but it sounds like the people that were actually up on the stage were very carefully chosen to reflect the messages and positioning that the charity was trying to get over. And when you have those people on stage, as you mentioned, Prince Harry himself came up and spoke, presumably the atmosphere is quite electric as you're bringing out those different guests and all the emotion of the evening is conveyed.
Because Prince Harry opened the event, he came up on stage first and did a speech, and actually he set the tone brilliantly, because it was a very informal speech. He had no notes. He was just standing at the front of the stage and walking around and being really engaging and really natural, because it was coming from the heart. And so that really set the scene for the whole evening. And I do think that every performance that happened had something completely different and amazing to offer. And it was just a wonderful mix of cultures and performances and, some music, some dance, some spoken, some poetry. It was just absolutely fantastic and beautifully curated.
How much rehearsal can you do? Obviously with members of the royal family and VIPs and so you can't necessarily rehearse with them, even the entertainers. So what do you do to sort of block out and look at the flow and work out who needs to be where and when? And how do you manage all of that?
That is all done in pre-production meetings, because you're absolutely right. We don't have the luxury of being able to just use the venue whenever we want to have people do walkthroughs. So we plan it to within an inch of its life on paper, because of course we know the venues very well, and we do production meetings and bring the production team on site, and we can walk them through the spaces, so we can obviously show them what we would expect to happen on the night. But it does have to be done in quite a lot of detail, because particularly for something like Sentebale, when we had the different hospitality areas that were in use, we had a number of different groups of people that we were having to move around the venue without sort of crossing them as much as possible. So we're sort of having to get everybody to their drinks reception starting rooms, then moving them all to their dinner spaces, and then moving them on to their post-dinner spaces. So there was a huge amount of crowd movement and group movement that needed to happen. It's just literally sitting down in a production meeting with it all on paper and just visualising where they can walk and thinking, okay, if they're going through that door, who's coming through that door? What time are we there? We've got to make sure that that doesn't happen at that time. And particularly when you do have someone from the royal family there, because of course they have a very detailed schedule that comes with them. So you have to layer that on top, of course, and ensure that what we were doing with everybody else was going to dovetail in with what needed to happen with Prince Harry. And actually, I do remember that right at the last minute, Prince Harry's timings changed. It was literally about 2 weeks out. We suddenly had to change all of the timings for all of the hospitality spaces in order to ensure that the people who were meant to be finishing their dinners or their drinks receptions and then moving to a space to go and meet Prince Harry, we needed to ensure that all of those timings then met up. So it was a little bit of a sort of slightly hair-raising moment right towards the end there, but we managed to do it. It's fine.
As well as the concert, you've mentioned that there were hospitality packages. How many people were you expecting, and what different kind of hospitality areas were you setting up for all of those different groups?
The biggest group that we had was 250. They started off in one area to have a drinks and canapé reception, to move into the Great Hall, which is the main Tudor banqueting room at Hampton Court Palace. They moved in there for a 3-course dinner and then moved to another separate room post that to have post-dinner cocktails and dessert canapés, etc. So those were 3 separate spaces that were set up for that one group. We then had a second group of about 150 people who had another 3 rooms to essentially do a similar package. There was then a further room, so we're now on room 7, where there was the VIP reception. So that was drinks and canapés for people who were specifically meeting with Prince Harry. So that was Prince Harry's space to meet with his guests in there. We then had another room, which was our orangery and privy garden space, which was for the general public to be able to purchase a drinks and canapé reception pre-show. And in there, we could have up to 150 people, another 150 people out there. So there was pretty much all of the venue spaces were in use at one point or other throughout the evening. The maximum capacity for the actual auditorium itself is 3,100. So yeah, it was a lot of fun trying to move these people around from their spaces, make sure that they all got where they were going. And especially because a lot of them, as I say, were famous faces. So the general public who were also coming to the concert were also moving through those spaces, so wanted to stop and say hello to them. So, there was a lot of crowd management that needed to take place to ensure that we were getting people to where they needed to be on time, because of course you only have a set amount of time before you need to get them then into their seats for the concert itself to begin.
So with your 3,100 guests, I'm really interested to know if you have any tips that you could share about how you stayed calm in that kind of environment, Liz.
I think it all comes down to actually, first of all, having confidence and trust in the team that you have around you, and the fact that you've worked very closely to plan things very carefully. So actually, when it comes to the night itself, you, in theory, should have worked through all of the different contingency plans that you may need to face. So actually, if something does go slightly awry, you know that you just switch to plan B, and everybody understands what plan B is. As I say, we worked so very closely and in such great detail with the suppliers, with the charity, with the production company, with IMG, who of course normally have the music festival in there for us. It felt like on the day, it was almost just like, okay, let's just press go and stand back, and hopefully everything will just roll out as it's meant to roll out. So it's all about having trust and faith in the people that you're working with and the plans that you've put in place. There's always going to be things that happen on the day that you haven't necessarily planned for. And actually one thing that I do remember about the day was, throughout the whole day, while we were doing the setup and sort of planning for the evening, we had torrential rain, absolutely torrential rain all day. So there was always one eye on the weather of, is it still going to be raining when all of these, celebrities and Prince Harry arrives? And do we need to sort of look at something different? We had, of course, got plans in place for how we were going to get them all in. The weather kept saying to us that it was going to stop raining just as all of the celebrities arrived. And would you believe it? It actually did. So the timing of it was just perfection. Suddenly the rain stopped. And then all the cars arrived and all the celebrities came out, and it was almost as if, someone was looking over us to make sure that this all ran smoothly. The knock on from that is that while we had got the guests and the celebrities into their spaces for their hospitality, myself and a number of the team then spent quite a lot of time just walking around the auditorium with enormous bits of sort of blue roll, wiping down all the seats, because of course all the seats were soaking wet. So it's like, because it had been raining literally all day.
Didn't it rain when he hosted it at Kensington Gardens as well a couple of years before?
Yes, it did. You're absolutely right. But, also, I think no one really minds. That's the beauty of these things, is that everyone knows that, the British weather is changeable. Come with an umbrella in your bag or come with a poncho. And if you haven't got one, we will provide one for you.
When you've got your team, everything's ready, you mentioned you're all set to press go. What does it feel like, Liz? You're in this incredible historic setting. You're carrying on the tradition of royal events at Hampton Court. Tell me about the atmosphere.
It is very magical. It feels very incredible to run any event actually in these spaces, because the history feels so very tangible in them. Every single one of the palaces that HRP manages just have such wonderful different personalities and different characteristics to them, and of course lots of different stories involved in them. And you are very, very aware of the fact that you are working within these incredible spaces with the history just kind of seeping out from every brick. And you're very conscious of the fact that your guests and yourself are literally walking in the footsteps of kings and queens, and walking in the footsteps of the guests that they would have had in these spaces, and hosting similarly sort of once in a lifetime experiences for people. It does feel incredibly privileged and a real honour to do it. Clients are looking for experiential opportunities, and actually that just kind of happens naturally if you have an event in one of these spaces.
As we've been hearing, Hampton Court Palace is an inspiring, immersive setting to host an event. If you'd like to hear more stories about events at incredible venues, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Hampton Court is just one of the historic royal palaces where Liz is responsible for creating events. For many people, an event is a dream of a job, but over the last few years it has of course been very challenging. Coming up, we talk about how they survived as a business and how it changed their approach to hosting events. But first, I asked Liz to explain just what her role involves.
My job is to work across the 6-venue portfolio that we have. So that's the Tower of London, Kensington Palace, Banqueting House in Whitehall, Hampton Court Palace, Kew Palace, which is in Kew Gardens, and then also Hillsborough Castle, which is over in Northern Ireland. It's the Queen's official residence over in Northern Ireland. And so my role is essentially driving the commercial business and trying to sweat these assets as much as possible and try and find different ways to think innovatively about how we can use these incredible old spaces to think differently and use them differently to try and drive that commercial revenue into the charity, because of course we are a charity, so all of the money that we make from any events that we host goes back into the charitable pot and enables us to continue on with the purpose, which is education and conservation of these venues.
Yeah, so I suppose these days we're starting to take it for granted, aren't we, that we can attend amazing events at incredible venues like the ones within your group. But of course, it wasn't always like that. And you've opened them up, as you say, you're a self-funded charity. It's an important source of revenue. How difficult was it to open up the historic venues for commercial events?
There obviously are a number of layers of different considerations that you have to work through when you're working in these spaces around conservation and preservation and making sure that we're not doing anything that damages the fabric of the building. But actually, we're very lucky at HRP because we have an incredibly talented conservation team who fully understand the importance of the events that we do for the charity. We work exceptionally closely with them to try and find solutions where there might be a particular challenge to. Obviously, there are some things that we simply cannot do. Obviously, you can't hammer anything into the walls, and we would prefer you not to have red wine in some spaces where you might splash it over a tapestry that's worth more than the venue itself. There are always ways that we can find solutions and find workarounds to ensure that we can still deliver on the vision of a client for their event, while ensuring that we're not compromising on the safety and the conservation preservation of the venue. There are ways of managing those risks and doing things very differently.
What about the actual type of events? Is there a criteria for what you would accept? Do you refer events across the group? How does the model work?
We're quite happy to take any event as long as we can, facilitate it and it works. The one sort of type of event that we wouldn't be able to take is anything that is politically based. Because of the connection to the royal household, we need to ensure that we are keeping away from anything that's politically motivated. But other than that, pretty much we would take any style of event. And you're right, that each different venue does have stronger links to certain types of events. For example, Hampton Court is very much more driven by the private event market and by weddings, because of just the setting of the palace and the style of the venue itself just lends itself more to that kind of beautiful romanticism. And then somewhere like the Tower has a much stronger corporate business. But we do have one eye constantly on ensuring that we're diversifying the business as much as possible at each of the venues, because we don't want to get to a point where, should there be a collapse in one part of the industry, that we're not suddenly left with no business at that particular palace. But we do also work very closely across the palaces. We have an events team that is based at each palace, but actually the team members themselves, there is inbuilt flexibility within the team now, whereby they can support events at any of the palaces. And actually that's something that has come out from post-pandemic, because ultimately we wanted to ensure that we were able to work much more flexibly across the palaces, especially when we weren't 100% sure how business was going to bounce back and which venue it might bounce back at more strongly, first of all, etc. So we sort of built in that flexibility. So there is much more cross-palace selling now. 100% if an event comes in to one of the venues and they haven't got the date available, they absolutely will be able to send through sales information for all of the other venues and then link them in with the other teams. So we are very lucky that we have that breadth of portfolio that enables us to sort of try and still hold on to the clients within the portfolio somewhere, instead of just having to sort of turn them down.
The eagle-eyed of us will probably notice your venue in Bridgerton. So I see you're also used as a film location.
The venues have historically been used for filming, for small pieces of filming here and there, but actually the pandemic, we were able to take advantage of the pandemic with that, really, because normally each of the venues, of course, is open as a day visitor attraction, which makes it very difficult for us to, of course, close down the venues to have something like Bridgerton in for a number of days to do the filming that they were doing. So actually, we were very lucky in that we were able to take advantage of that. And it was absolutely spectacular to have them on site and sort of and watch them at work. But we did actually do a lot of other filming as well. We filmed The Great also at Hampton Court, and also Killing Eve did some filming at the Tower of London. So it's something that we are hoping to sort of try and build that business going forward, because it's such a fantastic new revenue stream for us, actually, or one that we can certainly build on.
And it's great to hear some positives coming out of the pandemic, because I assume it must have been incredibly challenging for you with all of as a charity, you're not, no sources of revenue or anything. So I'm really pleased to hear that you managed to salvage something from it. Is there anything else that you took from that time about how you're changing your approach to events in the future?
It was a very difficult time, of course, as it was for everyone. And we were all sort of slightly discombobulated by it all, aren't we? But the charity as a whole actually ended up losing about £110 million. So it was a huge, huge financial crisis for us as a charity. And what was quite wonderful was that we were able to still continue with some events. So when we were able to do the micro weddings and we were able to do filming, etc., that really was an incredible positive for all of us and for the charity. Of course, not coming anywhere near to the finances that we had lost, as a lot of organisations did. We had to do a lot of redundancies, which of course is heartbreaking, and a big team restructure. But I think coming off the back of that, we've been able to look at ways of working, and in particular this flexible working across the teams. So there is this wonderful inbuilt support for each of the venues now across the teams, which is wonderful. And also just a bit more flexibility around our ability to use the spaces within each of the palaces. While the sort of day visitor business is recovering, there are opportunities now for us to say, actually, we've got an event that would like to use at Hampton Court Palace, as an example, all day on that Monday. Well, we're now closed on Mondays to the day visitors, so actually we can now do that. So there is much more inbuilt flexibility of our ability to actually use these spaces and try and drive more business into them, and just to do something different within the spaces that isn't just the kind of set routine that we always used to have around the day visitors, which has been really fantastic.
Flexibility keeps cropping up, doesn't it? It's all about flexibility and, as you say, trying to find a way to continually look to surprise and delight your clients. Are there things in the venue, we all kind of feel we know them, but are there any aspects of hosting events at the venues that might surprise people?
Often people are surprised by the fact that we can do events in them. Full stop. That was quite an interesting, when I first started in the job, there was quite an interesting message that we really needed to push out there a lot. Was one, that we were a charity, because people presume that we're Crown property, therefore the Queen pays for everything. Well, she doesn't. We are an independent charity and we have no funding from the government and no funding from the royal household. So that is the sort of a first shock that people have, I think, is that, A, we're a charity, but B, they can even do events at all, because people presume that these spaces are protected and therefore that sort of thing just wouldn't happen, because they are more like a museum in their minds of, mustn't go into that space and mustn't touch things, etc. Probably the biggest surprise is that, a space like, I keep going back to Hampton Court Palace, but the Great Hall at Hampton Court Palace has these series of tapestries that are the second most valuable asset of the country behind the crown jewels. And of course, we have the crown jewels at the Tower of London as well. And both of those spaces, we are allowed to do events. People can walk around in the spaces with those assets right there, having their champagne, having their dinners, etc. And so it's really, I think, quite an eye-opener for people that they're allowed to sort of get up close and personal with these incredible spaces and the objects that are in them as well.
Yeah, I'm always surprised as well at the range of spaces, so you picture these very grandiose rooms and backdrops, but there's also some quite small, intimate spaces that you can host events at. And there's that a lovely little space, isn't there, on the river at Hampton Court that I was thinking of?
Hampton Court Palace, yes, it's got the little banqueting house, which is this gorgeous standalone venue on the river, has its own private garden. It's all sort of painted inside the rooms itself. Absolutely stunning. But the Tower of London also has some gorgeous little spaces. There's the medieval tower where you can go in there and have a table of four if you want to. I mean, obviously it can fit more than four, but there are some absolutely beautiful spaces for small groups as well as up to the large spaces like the banqueting house that can, have up to 500. So we're very, very lucky. And I think, again, that helps us with our ability to accommodate such a huge wide range of different style of events and different size of events. And so, yes, hopefully we've got something to offer for everybody.
Yeah, and then, of course, there's all the new pop-up spaces, isn't there, around the Tower of London? I know you're involved with the celebrations for Queen's Jubilee. So there's it's not just historical spaces. You've got modern pop-ups as well. A whole raft of experiences within the group, really.
That is a good point, because there are some spaces that aren't historical that are still absolutely fantastic spaces. There's the Reveller on the wharf at the Tower of London. So it's outside the walls of the tower, but on the riverside. And it's a fantastic space that we haven't actually officially launched yet. And yet everybody seems to have heard about it. And we've had a number of events there already, which is a fantastic space because you can use the whole wharf. So you can build all kinds of structures down the wharf. And so, yes, that's absolutely wonderful. And of course we do have at the moment the Kensington Palace Pavilion. So there is actually a temporary structure that is built in the gardens of Kensington Palace at the moment while we are doing conservation works on the orangery, which is the historic part of the palace, to offset the loss of the orangery for these few years while that work has been going on. That has the capability to do some really huge, big, fantastic production. And actually we've had a couple of big gigs in there. Actually we've had sort of Duran Duran playing for events in there, so completely different to some of the historic spaces that obviously we can't fly things at the ceiling of those spaces.
Over your career, you've organised so many fantastic events. You've just name-dropped Duran Duran in the middle there. Not just at the historic royal palaces. I'm thinking of the time you project managed the O2's first live rooftop gig with Bon Jovi.
That was fun. I can talk for hours on that, yes. Do you know, I actually genuinely do have a photo of me sitting at the drum kit on the roof. You had to actually go up onto the roof of the arena itself, then climb up a sort of Jacob's ladder and pop out onto, the yellow spokes that come out the top of the tent. We had to pop out at the base of one of those yellow spikes and then literally just walk up the tent. So we were literally, obviously we had clipped on safety first, we had clipped on, but it was quite fascinating trying to find ways of where could you find gaps in the tent and sort of opening up vents to get guitars and drum kits out of. And then of course we had to get the band up there as well, so that was that was quite fun in and of itself. I must say I did rather enjoy putting John Bon Jovi into his harness. I did think I needed to help him personally with that.
Oh, right, Liz, we're going to hold you to sharing that image and we're going to be putting it on the show notes. Oh, dear. So out of all the incredible experiences that you've had working in events, what's left? What about not working in events but attending as a guest? Is there somewhere, an event in the world that you would most love to gatecrash?
I would love to attend a festival as a punter. I've never actually attended a festival. I've worked on a few festivals, but I've never attended as a punter. And I always think that, when you've worked on something like that and you know what goes on behind the scenes, sometimes you can sort of go on site and be constantly looking at, that's happening over there and I know what's going on behind the stage there and all that sort of thing. But actually, I'd love to just go and switch off and enjoy a few days of being entertained and having everything there for me and not having to worry about any of it. I'd love to have gone to the first ever Woodstock, something like that, just to kind of have an understanding of just how much things have changed. It's interesting. I don't often attend them because you sort of, when you work in events, it feels like a bit of a busman's holiday, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, let's hope you get the chance to do that in the summer, Liz, without your clipboard.
Yes.
Oh, Liz, it's been an absolute joy. It's been fascinating to hear about the Sentebale event and everything you're doing at Historic Royal Palaces. Thank you for sparing your time and joining us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been lovely to speak to you.
So, we don't all host events for senior members of the royal family, but there are still plenty of learnings from Liz's experiences that we can all benefit from. Because, after all, every guest attending an event should be made to feel like a VIP. Liz and her team spend a lot of time up front thinking about how to give all guests a great experience and how to make sure that the messages of the charity were clearly communicated. Of course, a charismatic speaker is an enormous help, but not enough on its own. Look to choose relevant performers that connect people to the overall story to ensure the event feels authentic. For a complicated event with lots of different elements, the key to success is in the planning. And Liz told us how her team had everything planned to within an inch of its life on paper. Trusting that team to deliver is key. By letting them focus on a particular area, it leaves you free to look at the bigger picture. That team, of course, includes suppliers. Having a list of approved suppliers or a black book of people that you know and trust is essential. Their experience will help you deal with challenging events that might require last-minute changes. You can plan as much as you like, but if you're not able to react and respond to change, then you're going to be in trouble. Having a plan B that's tried and tested means that, just like Liz, you're able to stay calm under pressure and carry on. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave a review and tell others about it, as we're on a mission to shine a spotlight on our wonderful events industry. I'll be back soon. But in the meantime, I'd love to chat more about events, so don't forget you can get in touch via our socials at Evolve Events. Let me know what event you'd most love to gatecrash. See you next time.